Hey guys! Tonight we're taking a journey to a place synonymous with unimaginable suffering and despair. Close your eyes and imagine the relentless, humid air of the tropics, thick with the scent of dense jungle and the tang of the salty sea. We're not going to a pristine beach resort, though. Instead, you're about to experience the terrifying, slow descent into the French penal colony of French Guiana, a place so horrific it earned the chilling moniker Devil's Island. This isn't just a story, it's an immersion into a living nightmare, where freedom was a distant memory and survival itself was a daily, brutal battle. And let me tell you, you probably wouldn't have lasted long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight, and what time is it there? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the constant sway of the ship beneath your feet, a steel cage packed with desperate souls. The year is the late 19th or early 20th century. You are one of thousands of convicts, shackled and crammed into the stifling hold of a transport vessel, known ominously as a death ship. The journey from France to French Guiana is not just a passage across the Atlantic. It's a terrifying initiation into the hell that awaits you. The air is thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, fear, and despair. Disease is rampant in these cramped conditions. Typhus, dysentery, and scurvy decimate the ranks of prisoners even before they reach their destination. You hear the hacking coughs, the groans of the sick, and the chilling silence of those who simply give up. This isn't just travel, it's a slow, torturous preamble to your fate. The French government established this penal colony in 1852, believing it to be a humane alternative to overcrowded prisons at home. Their grand idea was forced labor in a harsh environment, supposedly leading to rehabilitation. In reality, it was a dumping ground for the undesirable hardened criminals, political dissidents, and even those convicted of minor offenses. You realize it with a cold dread that your crime, whatever it may have been, has landed you in a place from which few ever return. The very name Devil's Island isn't just a nickname, it's a chillingly accurate descriptor of the conditions that await you. You gaze out at the vast, indifferent ocean, knowing that with every passing wave, you are moving further away from anything you once called home. The food on board is barely edible biscuits infested with weevils, salted meat that tastes more like leather, and water that's often brackish. You feel the gnawing hunger in your stomach, a constant companion that will only intensify once you reach the shore. The guards, often as hardened as the prisoners themselves, move through the ship with an air of detached cruelty, their faces grim, their eyes devoid of sympathy. They are a constant reminder of your lost freedom and the absolute power they wield over your very existence. A commonly known historical fact about these transport ships is that the death rate during the voyage itself was shockingly high. For many prisoners, the journey to French Guiana was effectively a death sentence, long before they even set foot on land. Statistics from various periods of the colony's operation show that thousands perished from disease and malnutrition on these ships. You feel a desperate cough rack your own body, a sharp pain in your chest, and wonder if you will even survive the trip. The fear of dying at sea, far from any familiar face, is a chilling reality you live with every moment. You overhear snippets of conversation among the other prisoners, hushed tales of what awaits them. Stories of impenetrable jungle, venomous snakes, deadly fevers, and the most brutal guards. Some speak of the three main islands Île Royale, the largest and administrative center, Île Saint-Joseph, known for its dreaded solitary confinement cells, and the infamous Île du Diable, Devil's Island itself, reserved for political prisoners and the most dangerous criminals, ringed by treacherous currents that made escape seemingly impossible. You realize you are not heading to a single isolated island, but a network of interconnected hells, each designed to break a man's spirit. One fascinating, yet less widely known, detail is the French government's initial, almost comically naive, belief that the penal colony would not only rehabilitate criminals but also act as a colonization tool. The idea was that upon completing their sentences, ex-convicts would be forced to settle in French Guiana, becoming a permanent labor force and helping to populate the remote territory. This policy, known as doublage, meant that if your sentence was for less than 8 years, you had to stay in the colony for an equivalent period after your release. If your sentence was 8 years or more, you were condemned to stay for life. This was, in many ways, an even more insidious punishment than the hard labor itself, ensuring that even if you survived your sentence, you would never truly be free to return home. You feel a fresh wave of despair wash over you as this chilling reality sinks in. Even freedom here is a cage. The air becomes heavier, more humid, as the ship draws closer to the equator. The sun beats down with a ferocious intensity, and the tropical heat becomes almost unbearable in the crowded hold. You sweat constantly, your clothes sticking to your skin, providing fertile ground for the skin infections and boils that plague many of your fellow prisoners. The smell of decay from the sickbay permeates the air, a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and death on this voyage. Historians still debate the precise effectiveness of the penal colony as a deterrent. While it certainly instilled terror in the hearts of potential criminals in France, its high death rate and the complete dehumanization of its inmates raised serious ethical questions. Was it truly a system of justice, or simply a convenient way to dispose of society's undesirables, out of sight and out of mind? The debate highlights the tension between punishment and rehabilitation, a struggle that continues to this day in penal systems around the world. You consider the philosophical implications of such a brutal system, wondering if true justice can ever exist in a place so devoid of humanity. As the days turn into weeks, you feel your body weakening, your spirit fraying. The constant deprivation, the ever-present fear, and the lack of privacy strip away your individuality, reducing you to a mere number, a cog in a vast, dehumanizing machine. You see men around you losing their minds, succumbing to the despair, their eyes vacant, their bodies trembling. This is not just physical torment, it is a profound assault on the human spirit, designed to break you down, piece by agonizing piece. Finally, after weeks of unbearable travel, a distant, hazy green line appears on the horizon. It's land. But instead of hope, a wave of dread washes over you. This isn't the familiar, welcoming shore of home. This is French Guiana, the infamous coastline of the penal colony. You catch a glimpse of the infamous Île du Salut, the Salvation Islands, looming in the distance, tiny specks of rock in the vast, unforgiving ocean. As the ship draws closer, the air grows thick with the promise of suffering, a silent, menacing welcome to your new hell. Your terrible life as a prisoner is about to truly begin. You feel the ship slow, the engines groaning as it finally reaches its grim destination. The air, already heavy with humidity, now carries a new, unsettling aroma, a mix of tropical decay, human sweat, and a metallic tang that could only be fear. You are herded off the transport ship, your legs wobbly from weeks of confinement, your eyes squinting against the blinding equatorial sun. The island rising before you isn't a verdant paradise, it's a green hell, a dense, suffocating jungle teeming with unseen threats. This is Saint-Laurent-du-Maroni, the main penitentiary hub on the mainland of French Guiana, often called the guillotine sèche or dry guillotine by the convicts themselves, a chilling testament to its lethal reputation. As your bare feet hit the scorching earth, you feel the coarse sand and small, sharp stones digging into your skin. You're no longer just a prisoner, you are now a bagnard, a convict reduced to a mere number. The guards, with their stern faces and loaded rifles, push you forward, their commands sharp and unforgiving. You see the main buildings of the penal colony grim, imposing stone structures that seem to absorb the intense heat, radiating an oppressive sense of permanence. These aren't temporary shelters, they are fortresses built to contain despair. The first thing that truly hits you, beyond the heat and the guards' shouts, is the noise. The incessant buzzing of insects, the squawks of unseen birds, and, most disturbingly, the constant low murmur of hundreds, if not thousands, of other prisoners. They are everywhere, some already gaunt and listless, others with a haunted, desperate look in their eyes. You realize this isn't just a place of punishment, it's a living, breathing organism of suffering. A commonly known historical fact is that the conditions at Saint-Laurent-du-Maroni and the surrounding camps were notoriously brutal. Prisoners were subjected to backbreaking labor from dawn till dusk under the merciless sun. The work varied felling trees in the dense, snake-infested jungle, draining swamps infested with malaria-carrying mosquitoes, building roads that seemingly led nowhere, or working in the stone quarries. You feel the sweat already pouring down your face, stinging your eyes, and know this is just the beginning of your physical torment. You're immediately stripped of any personal belongings, anything that might connect you to your former life. Your clothes are replaced with the infamous striped uniform, a stark, humiliating symbol of your incarceration. Your head is shaven, a crude method of hygiene and dehumanization. You are assigned a number, and that number becomes your identity. You are no longer you are simply a unit of labor, another nameless body in a vast, dehumanizing system. The living quarters are equally appalling. You are crammed into large, open dormitories, often with hundreds of other men. The air is stagnant, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, disease, and despair. Hammocks are slung close together, offering no privacy, no personal space. Vermin, rats, cockroaches, and bedbugs are ubiquitous, a constant, itchy torment. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful, haunted by the sounds of coughs, groans, and the ever-present drone of insects. One particularly grim, yet less commonly known. Detail is the lack of fresh water in many of the camps, despite being in a tropical environment. While French Guiana has abundant rainfall, the infrastructure to collect and purify water was often neglected. Prisoners were frequently given stagnant, contaminated water, leading to widespread outbreaks of dysentery and other waterborne diseases. You feel your throat scratchy, constantly craving clean water, knowing that every sip you take could be a sip of sickness. This simple lack of a basic necessity contributed immensely to the colony's high mortality rates. The food, as you quickly discover, is barely enough to sustain life. Your daily ration often consists of a small amount of rice, some dried beans, and perhaps a tiny piece of dried fish or meat, often rotten. Malnutrition is rampant, weakening your body, making you more susceptible to disease, and eroding your mental fortitude. You feel the constant gnawing of hunger, a dull ache in your stomach that never truly goes away. Every meal is a desperate scramble, a silent battle for every meager morsel. The penal colony was not just for men. A small section known as the relegation was also established for women, though their numbers were significantly smaller. These women, often accused of minor crimes like prostitution or vagrancy, faced equally harsh conditions, enduring forced labor and rampant abuse. While the narrative often focuses on the male prisoners, the forgotten suffering of these women adds another layer to the dark history of the colony, highlighting the pervasive cruelty of the system. Historians still debate the true motivations behind the French government's continued operation of Devil's Island for so long. Despite international condemnation and its clear failure as a rehabilitation program, some argue it was a matter of national pride and a desire to maintain a visible deterrent for crime. Others contend it was a convenient way to dispose of social outcasts and political undesirables, far from the public eye. The question remains how much of the prolonged suffering was due to genuine belief in the system, and how much was simply bureaucratic inertia and a callous indifference to human life. You witness the pervasive threat of disease. Malaria, yellow fever, dysentery, typhoid, and tuberculosis are not just possibilities. They are almost certainties. The tropical climate, the unsanitary conditions, the malnutrition, and the constant exposure to insects create a deadly cocktail. You see men succumb to fever, their bodies shaking uncontrollably, their skin turning yellow. The infirmary, if you're lucky enough to be admitted, is often just another overcrowded, unsanitary room, offering little more than a place to die. You hear the constant coughing, the desperate cries of the sick, and know that your own health is a fragile thing, constantly under assault. The guards, known as gardes sûres, are a law unto themselves. They rule with an iron fist, their power absolute. Beatings are common, often for minor infractions or simply to maintain dominance. You learn quickly to keep your head down, to follow orders without question, to become invisible. Any sign of defiance, any hint of rebellion, is met with swift and brutal punishment. The constant threat of violence, both from the guards and from other desperate prisoners, creates an atmosphere of pervasive terror. You realize that this place isn't just designed to punish, it's designed to break you, to strip away your dignity, your hope, and ultimately, your will to live. The sheer scale of the dehumanization, the relentless physical and psychological torment, is overwhelming. As you settle into your first night in this dry guillotine, surrounded by the sounds of suffering, you know that this is a place where survival is not just about physical endurance, but about clinging to the faintest spark of your humanity in the face of absolute despair. The terrible life of a prisoner has just truly begun. You've survived the terrifying journey and the initial shock of arrival. But now you confront the relentless, soul-crushing reality of daily life in the penal colony. Your existence is stripped down to its most basic, brutal elements: labor, hunger, and an omnipresent sense of dread. Each day begins before dawn, heralded by the shrill blast of a whistle or the banging of a gong, jolting you awake from what little fitful sleep you might have managed in the stifling, vermin-infested dormitory. You roll out of your hammock, your muscles stiff and aching from the previous day's toil. There's no time for personal hygiene beyond a quick splash of stagnant water. You're immediately herded into lines for a meager breakfast, usually a watery gruel or a piece of stale bread. The silence is broken only by the shuffling of feet, the grumbling of empty stomachs, and the barked orders of the guard Shurme, the brutal prison guards who oversee every aspect of your existence. Their uniforms, often crisp despite the humidity, stand in stark contrast to your own ragged, striped attire, a constant visual reminder of their absolute authority and your utter powerlessness. A commonly known historical fact is that the primary purpose of the penal colony was forced labor. The French government envisioned these convicts as a cheap, inexhaustible workforce to develop French Guiana's infrastructure and exploit its natural resources. You are assigned to a work gang, perhaps destined for the dense, impenetrable jungle where the air hangs thick with humidity and the ground is a treacherous swamp. Your tools are crude, heavy axes, machetes, and shovels, and the work is backbreaking. You spend hours felling massive trees, hacking through vines, and digging drainage ditches, your body screaming in protest. The jungle itself is an enemy, teeming with venomous snakes, scorpions, and hordes of mosquitoes that carry diseases like malaria and yellow fever, which claim far more lives than the guards' bullets. The tropical climate is a constant torment. The sun beats down with merciless intensity, raising the temperature to unbearable levels. You sweat constantly, your clothes soaked through, your skin chafing. The humidity is so oppressive that even breathing feels like a struggle. Rain showers, out when they come, are not a relief but a new torment, turning the earth into slick mud and exacerbating skin infections. You feel your strength draining away with every bead of sweat, your body slowly wasting under the relentless assault of the environment and the endless labor, one particularly grim, yet less commonly discussed. Detail of the daily routine was the discipline cell, or cachot. For even minor infractions, a slow pace of work, a muttered complaint, or a perceived insolence, prisoners could be thrown into these solitary confinement cells. These were often tiny, windowless stone boxes, completely dark, sweltering hot, and often infested with insects. Prisoners would be kept for days or even weeks, sometimes without food or water, in unimaginable conditions. The psychological impact of such isolation, combined with the physical deprivation, was designed to utterly break a man's spirit. You imagine the terror of being cast into such a void, knowing that your sanity might not survive. The food remains a constant source of agony. Lunch is often brought to the work sites, providing little respite. It's the same meager fare as breakfast, barely enough to quell the persistent pangs of hunger. You learn to eat quickly, to guard your portion fiercely, for theft among desperate men is common. You see men grow gaunt, their ribs showing through their skin, their eyes hollow with starvation. The lack of proper nutrition makes you even more vulnerable to the myriad diseases that thrive in this environment. Evenings offer little relief. After working until dusk, you are marched back to the communal dormitories. There's no meaningful rest or recreation. You clean your tools, if you have any, and prepare for another meager meal. The air in the dorms is thick with the groans of the sick, the sounds of men coughing, and the endless buzz of mosquitoes. Sleep is a fleeting luxury, constantly interrupted by discomfort, the heat, and the ever-present anxiety about the next day's labor, or worse, the punishments you might face. The psychological toll of this existence is immense. You are constantly watched, constantly reminded of your lack of freedom. Every decision, every movement is controlled. There's no dignity, no privacy, no hope for personal advancement. The system is designed to dehumanize you, to strip away your individuality and reduce you to a compliant, laboring machine. You see men break under the pressure, succumbing to madness, or simply giving up, their eyes vacant, their spirits extinguished. The role of the French colonial administration in maintaining such brutal conditions is a significant point of academic debate. While the stated goal was rehabilitation and colonization, many historians argue that the primary aim quickly became the cheap disposal of unwanted elements of society. The immense profits generated from the forced labor, combined with the convenience of isolating undesirable individuals far from mainland France, often outweighed any humanitarian concerns. The question remains, to what extent were the conditions a deliberate policy of extermination, and to what extent were they simply the result of neglect, corruption, and bureaucratic indifference? The guards themselves are often former convicts or hardened soldiers, chosen for their brutality and lack of empathy. They are a law unto themselves, operating with almost complete impunity. Beatings are common, often with no stated reason. You witness fellow prisoners being whipped, kicked, or struck with rifle butts for trivial infractions. The threat of the cachot or even harsher punishments, like the double iron chains, keeps the men in line. There's no appeal, no recourse, no one to hear your pleas. Your life is entirely at the mercy of your captors. You realize that survival in this environment isn't just about physical strength. It's about mental fortitude. It's about learning the unwritten rules, understanding the unspoken hierarchies among the prisoners, and finding tiny, almost imperceptible ways to cling to your humanity. You learn to distrust everyone, to be constantly on guard, but also to recognize the fleeting moments of genuine human connection that occasionally surface amidst the despair. This constant tension, this perpetual state of high alert, grinds away at your soul, slowly eroding your sense of self. The daily grind of suffering is not merely punishment. It is a meticulous, systematic dismantling of the human spirit. You are now deep within the brutal, unforgiving world of Devil's Island, and the daily grind of survival has etched itself onto your very being. You've learned that the most immediate threats aren't just the jungle and disease, but the unpredictable cruelty of the guards and the complex, often violent, social dynamics among the prisoners themselves. It's a terrifying ecosystem where every interaction is a negotiation of power, and trust is a dangerous luxury. The garde assurme, the prison guards, are your direct tormentors, the undisputed masters of this infernal domain. They are a law unto themselves, operating with an almost divine impunity. You quickly learn that their moods dictate your fate. A casual glance, a perceived slowdown in work, or a flicker of defiance in your eyes can result in a brutal beating with a stick, a kick from a heavy boot, or a night, or even weeks, in the dreaded cachot solitary confinement. You witness their arbitrary cruelty, seeing fellow prisoners savaged for minor infractions, their screams echoing through the humid air. There is no appeal, no oversight. Their word is absolute, and their will is enforced with swift physical pain. You keep your head down, your movements subdued, trying to become as invisible as possible to avoid attracting their attention. A commonly known historical fact is that the guards themselves were often drawn from the ranks of former soldiers or ex-convicts who had served their time but chose to stay in the colony for lack of other options. This meant they were often hardened, desensitized individuals, many with their own histories of violence and trauma. You realize this isn't a force of benevolent oversight, but a perpetuation of the very brutality that defines the colony. They are products of the same dehumanizing system, now wielding its power. Now, within the prisoner population, a complex, unwritten code of conduct emerges. Survival often depends on understanding this brutal hierarchy. There are the caïds, the unofficial leaders, often the strongest or most ruthless prisoners, who demand respect and sometimes protection in exchange for loyalty. You learn that aligning with the wrong group, or conversely, trying to go it alone, can be incredibly dangerous. Theft is rampant, especially of food or meager possessions. Violence erupts quickly over perceived slights, gambling debts, or just raw desperation. Knives, often fashioned from scrap metal, are hidden and used in sudden, savage bursts of fury. You learn to sleep with one eye open, always aware of your surroundings. knowing that danger can come from any direction. One particularly chilling, yet less commonly discussed, detail is the phenomenon of prison marriages or mariages de bagnard. In the absence of women and under the extreme pressures of confinement, some male prisoners formed quasi-marital relationships. These relationships, while offering a semblance of emotional support or companionship, also often involved elements of coercion and violence, reflecting the brutal power dynamics of the colony. It's a stark reminder of the desperate lengths to which human beings will go to seek connection, even in the most dehumanizing environments, and the twisted forms that connection can take. The concept of punishment within punishment is omnipresent. Even if you survive the daily labor and the constant threat of violence, you face a series of escalating penalties for perceived misbehavior. Beyond the cachot, you could be subjected to double iron chains, where you're shackled to another prisoner day and night, even during work and sleep, preventing any semblance of privacy or independence. This effectively doubles your torment, as you are now beholden to another desperate soul. You also hear whispers of the dungeons, deeper, darker cells reserved for the most incorrigible, where men often emerged broken in mind and spirit, or never emerged at all. The psychological warfare waged by the system is as insidious as the physical one. The constant surveillance, the lack of hope, the arbitrary nature of the rules, it all chips away at your sanity. You're always waiting for the next blow, the next punishment, the next act of cruelty. This perpetual state of anxiety grinds down even the strongest wills. You see men simply give up, their eyes vacant, their bodies going through the motions, their spirits extinguished. They become zombies, empty vessels wandering through a living hell. Historians still debate the extent to which the cruelty of the guards was officially sanctioned versus the result of individual depravity or the psychological toll of their own harsh living conditions. While the French government certainly set up a brutal system, the day-to-day abuses were often the result of unchecked power exercised by low-ranking officials. The argument is often made that the environment itself fostered and even demanded cruelty, creating a cycle of violence that consumed both the punished and the punishers. You learn the unspoken rules of survival. Never draw attention to yourself. Never trust a stranger. Never hoard anything valuable. Never challenge a guard. Never show weakness. These are the commandments of the condemned, etched into your mind through observation and brutal experience. You also learn that cooperation, however fleeting, can sometimes offer a momentary respite. Sharing a precious bit of extra food, a moment of silence, or a shared glance of defiance. These small acts of camaraderie become lifelines in an otherwise desolate existence. The threat of denunciation is also a constant shadow. A prisoner might inform on another to gain favor with a guard, to settle a grudge, or simply for a meager reward of extra rations or a lighter work assignment. This creates an atmosphere of pervasive paranoia, making genuine trust almost impossible. You realize that the system thrives on division, on turning prisoners against each other, further preventing any organized resistance or collective hope. Your existence is a constant tightrope walk between obedience and defiance, between survival and succumbing to despair. The guards are the ever-present, menacing figures, their authority absolute, their punishment swift. The prisoners around you are a volatile mix of desperation and cunning, capable of both brutal acts and fleeting moments of humanity. You navigate this terrible world day by day, hour by hour, your senses heightened, your guard never down, constantly aware that your life hangs by the thinnest of threads, at the mercy of both masters and fellow sufferers. The terrible reality of this prison extends far beyond the physical chains. It binds your mind and spirit in an inescapable web of cruelty and survival. You've endured the daily grind, the constant threat of the guards, and the treacherous social landscape among the prisoners. Now, as your body weakens from malnutrition and ceaseless labor, you realize that another, more insidious enemy constantly stalks the penal colony disease. The tropical environment, the abysmal sanitation, and the sheer density of suffering bodies create a perfect breeding ground for sickness, turning every cough, every fever, into a potential death sentence. You feel the constant dampness clinging to your skin, the oppressive humidity that never seems to lift. This climate, so beautiful to a tourist, is a deadly adversary for a prisoner. Mosquitoes, thick as clouds, descend upon you, their bites leaving itchy welts that quickly become infected in the unsanitary conditions. You see men shaking with malaria, their teeth chattering uncontrollably as chills rack their bodies, followed by burning fevers that leave them delirious. Yellow fever, with its terrifying symptoms of jaundice and internal bleeding, claims lives swiftly and brutally. These aren't just abstract diseases. They are ever-present predators, lurking in every swampy puddle, every unwashed utensil, every breath of humid air. A commonly known historical fact is that disease was the single greatest killer in the French penal colonies of French Guiana, far surpassing executions or violence from guards. The mortality rates were astronomically high, often reaching 50% or more in some years, primarily due to tropical diseases and the resulting complications from malnutrition and lack of proper medical care. You hear the constant guttural coughs of men suffering from tuberculosis, a slow, wasting disease that preys on weakened lungs. Dysentery, caused by contaminated food and water, leads to agonizing dehydration and a rapid descent into death. You feel a constant churning in your own stomach, a fear that any moment, these invisible killers could claim you. The infirmary if you're fortunate enough to even reach it, offers little solace. It's often an overcrowded, unsanitary space where sick prisoners are simply left to die. Medicines are scarce. Proper medical instruments even rarer. The doctors, few and often overwhelmed, can do little more than offer palliative care or pronounce the dead. You witness the despair in the eyes of the sick, knowing their fate is sealed not by a judge, but by an unseen microbe, one particularly grim, yet less commonly discussed. Detail is the prevalence of beriberi, a debilitating disease caused by a severe deficiency of thiamine vitamin B1. This condition, characterized by swelling edema, heart failure, and nerve damage, was widespread due to the monotonous and nutrient-deficient diet of rice and dried beans. You might see fellow prisoners with swollen limbs, struggling to breathe, or barely able to walk due to nerve damage. It's a slow, agonizing descent, a testament to the systematic neglect of basic human nutritional needs. The simple lack of vitamins, something easily remedied in the outside world, became a death sentence here. The despair that permeates the colony is a disease in itself. You see men lose the will to live, succumbing to what was known as cafard, a profound existential weariness and depression that often preceded death or desperate, suicidal escape attempts. It's a mental and emotional breakdown, born from the relentless dehumanization and the complete absence of hope. You feel its icy tendrils occasionally brush against your own mind, and you fight fiercely to cling to any spark of resilience, any shred of purpose to avoid being consumed by it. Despite the overwhelming odds, the human spirit, stubbornly, sometimes fights back. You hear whispers of escape attempts, desperate gambles against impossible odds. The coastline of French Guiana is ringed by dense, alligator-infested mangrove swamps, and the open ocean beyond is a vast, shark-filled expanse with treacherous currents. Small, makeshift rafts, often constructed in secret from stolen wood scraps, are the only vessels of hope. Many of these attempts end in tragedy. You hear of men drowned, devoured by sharks, or simply lost at sea, their desperate bids for freedom culminating in a lonely, unceremonious death. The academic debate about the ethics of such penal colonies and their effectiveness continues. While officially touted as places of rehabilitation, their incredibly high mortality rates and the sheer brutality of the conditions lead many historians to classify them as forms of slow extermination or penal death camps. The question remains, was the French government truly unaware of the horrific conditions? Or was the geographical isolation of the colony a convenient way to dispose of undesirable elements of society without direct public scrutiny? The evidence suggests a callous indifference, if not outright deliberate neglect. You witness the brutal reality of failed escapes. Those who are caught, often malnourished and exhausted, face savage beatings, extended periods in the cachot, or worse, some are deliberately made an example of, their broken bodies displayed as a grim warning to others who might dare to dream of freedom. The psychological impact of witnessing these failures is immense. It crushes any nascent hope of escape, reinforcing the terrifying notion that this place truly is a point of no return. Despite the constant despair, there are fleeting moments of human connection, tiny sparks of resistance that defy the system. sharing a cigarette smuggled in, a hushed conversation about home, or a small act of kindness. These brief instances remind you that even in this dehumanizing environment, some shred of humanity persists. These moments are rare, precious, and often dangerous, but they are vital for clinging to your sanity. You spend your days consumed by the fight against sickness, hunger, and despair. Your body is a constant battleground, ravaged by tropical diseases, weakened by malnutrition, and constantly battered by labor and punishment. Your mind is under siege, battling the creeping madness of isolation and hopelessness. You exist in a state of perpetual vigilance, not just against the guards and your fellow prisoners, but against the very environment itself, which seems intent on claiming your life. The terrible life of a prisoner in Devil's Island is a relentless, agonizing struggle for basic survival against overwhelming forces, both visible and invisible. You've navigated the physical torment of labor, the constant threat of disease, and the pervasive violence. But now you confront a punishment arguably more insidious and soul-crushing: isolation. Devil's Island, and indeed the entire penal colony, was designed not just to punish the body, but to break the mind through profound solitude and the systematic stripping away of human connection. The infamous Ile Saint-Joseph, one of the 3 Salvation Islands, was specifically dedicated to solitary confinement, the dreaded cachot noir, or black cells. You hear the whispers among the prisoners, tales of men who entered those cells and never truly emerged, their minds shattered by the profound absence of light, sound, and human interaction. These cells were tiny, often no more than 6 feet by 6 feet, with thick stone walls that muffled all external noise. There were no windows, no light source, only absolute, suffocating darkness. You feel the claustrophobia begin to set in just imagining it. The walls closing in, the air growing heavy, the silence pressing down on your very being. A commonly known historical fact about these solitary confinement cells is their extreme psychological impact. Prisoners would spend weeks, months, or even years in these conditions, often fed through a small slot in the door with no contact with the outside world. Many succumbed to madness, babbling incoherently, hallucinating, or descending into catatonia. The goal was not merely punishment, but complete psychological subjugation to break the will and spirit of even the most defiant individual. You consider the sheer terror of having only your own thoughts for company, with no external stimuli to anchor you to reality. The psychological torment extends beyond the literal solitary cells. Even in the larger communal barracks, a sense of profound isolation could pervade. You are a number, not a name. You are forbidden from speaking French to each other, forced to use a local Creole dialect, which further alienates those who don't speak it. Meaningful conversation is dangerous, as any overheard complaint or dissent could lead to punishment. Trust is a luxury few can afford. You exist in a crowded loneliness, surrounded by bodies but starved of genuine human connection. This enforced silence and suspicion foster a deep sense of psychological fragmentation, one particularly haunting yet less commonly discussed detail of the isolation regimen was the reclusion, or reclusion period. This was a form of semi-solitary confinement, often implemented after a prisoner had served a longer sentence in the dark cells, or as an initial period for certain categories of convicts. Prisoners would be confined to smaller individual cells, but might be allowed short periods of exercise in a small, walled yard, always alone. While not as extreme as the black cells, this prolonged period of minimal human interaction further eroded mental stability, leading to profound depression and a heightened sense of abandonment. You can almost feel the slow creep of mental decay, the gradual blurring of the lines between reality and illusion. The overall geographic isolation of the penal colony itself contributes significantly to the psychological punishment. You are on an island, or a series of islands, far from any civilized society. The vast, shark-infested ocean acts as an impenetrable barrier, and the dense, malaria-ridden jungle on the mainland serves as another. There is no escape, no easy way out. This physical remoteness amplifies the feeling of being utterly cut off, forgotten by the world, condemned to a fate from which there is no return. The academic debate often questions whether such extreme forms of isolation are truly effective as a deterrent or for rehabilitation. While they undoubtedly broke many individuals, they rarely led to genuine reform. Instead, they often created hardened, mentally scarred individuals, ill-equipped to reintegrate into society, should they ever gain their freedom. This raises fundamental questions about the purpose of incarceration. Is it merely retribution? Or is there a higher aim? The methods used on Devil's Island seem to lean entirely towards the former, with devastating consequences for the human psyche. You witness the profound impact of this psychological torture on your fellow prisoners. Some descend into madness, muttering to themselves, rocking back and forth, their eyes vacant. Others withdraw completely, becoming ghost-like figures, barely registering the world around them. The once vibrant human spirit is slowly extinguished, replaced by a hollow shell. You fight constantly to keep your own mind sharp, to remember your name, your past, anything that anchors you to who you once were, lest you too fall victim to the crushing weight of isolation. The absence of female companionship also contributed to the profound isolation experienced by male prisoners. With very few women in the colony and strict segregation, male prisoners lived in an entirely masculine, brutal world. This lack of familial connection or romantic intimacy further exacerbated feelings of loneliness and despair, adding another layer to the psychological torment that was pervasive in the penal system. The true punishment of Devil's Island, you realize, was not just the physical pain or the hard labor. It was the deliberate, systematic attempt to dismantle the human mind, to sever all ties to identity, hope, and connection. It was the crushing weight of utter, unending solitude, designed to leave you with nothing but your own terrifying thoughts. In this desolate place, isolation was not just a condition, it was the ultimate, inescapable sentence, silently eroding the very essence of what it meant to be human. You have seen the relentless brutality of the colony, from the harrowing journey to the dehumanizing daily grind and the soul-crushing isolation. Now you turn your attention to the individuals, some famous, some tragically forgotten, who endured this hellish existence. Their stories, often tales of extraordinary resilience or profound despair, bring a human face to the statistics of suffering and shed light on the diverse reasons people ended up in this terrible place. Perhaps the most famous prisoner, whose name has become synonymous with Devil's Island, is Alfred Dreyfus. You recall his story, a central figure in one of France's greatest political scandals. Dreyfus was a Jewish artillery officer in the French army, accused in 1894 of treason for allegedly passing military secrets to Germany. His trial was a travesty of justice, fueled by anti-Semitism and political intrigue. He was swiftly convicted and, in 1895, publicly degraded and sent to the infamous Ile du Diable Devil's Island itself. The smallest and most isolated of the Salvation Islands, a commonly known historical fact about Dreyfus's imprisonment on Devil's Island is the extreme measures taken to ensure his isolation. He was confined to a small, windowless hut, guarded constantly, and forbidden from communicating with anyone outside his immediate guards. For a time, he was even shackled to his bed at night. The French authorities were terrified he might escape or communicate with conspirators, so they enforced a level of isolation that bordered on torture. Despite the fact that he was already on a tiny, remote island surrounded by treacherous currents and shark-infested waters, you imagine the profound psychological torment of such enforced solitude. Far from family, wrongly accused, and clinging to a fragile hope of exoneration. Dreyfus's story is unique among the general convict population because he was a political prisoner, a man of education and social standing, rather than a common criminal. His case garnered immense international attention, dividing French society and sparking a fierce debate about justice, anti-Semitism, and the role of the military. Figures like Émile Zola famously championed his cause, publishing the explosive J'accuse letter, which denounced the military's cover-up and exposed the depth of the injustice. One particularly poignant, yet less commonly discussed detail about Dreyfus's time on Devil's Island is his obsession with keeping a diary. Despite the relentless heat, the constant surveillance, and the psychological strain, Dreyfus meticulously kept a journal, recording his thoughts, his despair, and his unwavering belief in his innocence. This act of writing was not only a way to preserve his sanity, but also a testament to his determination to one day prove his innocence. He knew his words might be his only witness to the truth, a desperate act of defiance against a system designed to silence him. You feel the weight of his words, scribbled in secret, a lifeline in an abyss of despair. While Dreyfus's story is famous for its eventual, albeit delayed, justice, he was finally exonerated in 1906. He represents only a tiny fraction of the men sent to the penal colony. Most prisoners were forgotten, nameless individuals whose lives simply vanished into the jungle or the sea. You reflect on the thousands who suffered and died without ever having their names cleared or their stories told. Consider the ordinary convicts, the bagnards, who made up the vast majority. You hear stories of men convicted of petty theft, vagrancy, or desertion from the army, thrust into the same brutal system as hardened murderers. There's Papillon Henri Charrière, whose hugely popular, though highly fictionalized, autobiography painted a vivid picture of life and escape attempts from the colony. While much of his narrative is disputed by historians, it popularized the image of Devil's Island and the spirit of daring escape. You recognize the thirst for freedom, the desperate clinging to hope, even in the most crushing circumstances. The academic debate about the historical accuracy of popular accounts like Papillon is significant. While such narratives draw attention to historical sites of injustice, they can also romanticize or distort the brutal realities faced by most prisoners. Historians strive to differentiate between individual, often embellished, stories of survival and the grim, widespread suffering of the general convict population, which was far less glamorous and far more lethal. You learn of prisoners who became experts in their forced trades, perhaps skilled carpenters or stonemasons, whose expertise was exploited by the administration. Some formed tight-knit groups for mutual protection, creating a fragile sense of community amidst the chaos. Others descended into complete despair, their spirits broken, becoming the Kafars you learned about, who simply gave up on life. The fates of these inmates were diverse, yet almost uniformly tragic. Many succumbed to disease, perishing from malaria, dysentery, or yellow fever. Others died from exhaustion, malnutrition, or the violence of guards or fellow prisoners. Escape, as you've learned, was a near impossibility, with the jungle and ocean proving to be far more formidable guards than any human. Those few who did manage to escape often met their end in the unforgiving wilderness, or were recaptured and subjected to even harsher punishments. You consider the profound injustice for many. Some were wrongly convicted, like Dreyfus. Others were victims of poverty and harsh social laws, their minor offenses carrying disproportionately severe penalties. The penal colony was a convenient way for France to sweep its social problems under the rug, far from the public eye. You are left with a sobering realization that for every famous name, there were thousands who simply disappeared, swallowed by the jungle and the sea, their suffering unheard, their stories untold. Their lives, terrible and anonymous, are the true legacy of this island of despair. You've explored the arrival, the daily torment, the diseases, the isolation, and the individual stories that define life within the penal colony. But the nightmare for many did not end with the completion of their sentence. You now confront the chilling reality of doublage, the mandatory extended stay in French Guiana, a policy that transformed a temporary sentence into a lifelong exile and, for most, a slow death. As you remember, the French government, in its misguided attempt at colonization and cost saving, decreed that any prisoner sentenced to less than 8 years would be forced to remain in French Guiana for a period equal to their sentence after their release. If your sentence was 8 years or more, you were condemned to stay for life. This meant that even if you survived the brutal labor and disease of the prison camps, you were still tethered to this green hell, denied the fundamental right to return home. You feel the profound injustice of this policy, realizing that for thousands, freedom was merely a transfer from one form of confinement to another. A commonly known historical fact about doublage is that it significantly inflated the colony's death toll. Ex-convicts, now libérés freedmen, were given virtually no support. They were released into a hostile environment, often with no money, no skills applicable to civilian life in a tropical jungle, and no prospects. They were forbidden from returning to France, denied passage, and constantly monitored. This forced residency effectively condemned them to a lingering demise from disease, starvation, or violence in the unforgiving wilderness or the squalid towns that sprung up around the penal camps. You observe the grim reality for these libérés. They often congregated in the few towns along the coast, like Saint-Laurent-du-Maroni or Cayenne, living in abject poverty. They tried to find work, but legitimate employment was scarce, and their status as former convicts made them undesirable. Many resorted to petty crime, illicit trading, or even reoffending just to survive, often leading them back into the penal system. The cycle of despair was almost impossible to break. You see men with haunted eyes, their bodies ravaged by years of hardship, their dreams of home long since evaporated. One particularly poignant, yet less commonly discussed, detail of the doublage system was the zones réservées, or reserved zones. These were designated areas within French Guiana where libérés were theoretically supposed to settle and develop agricultural projects. However, these zones were often remote, infertile, and lacked any infrastructure or support from the administration. The intention was perhaps to create self-sufficient communities of ex-convicts, but in practice, they became desolate, forgotten corners where libérés starved or succumbed to disease, further underscoring the government's profound neglect. You imagine the desolation of these isolated settlements, another cruel twist in a life already filled with suffering. The psychological toll of doublage was immense. After years of dreaming of freedom to achieve it only to find yourself still trapped, still in exile, unable to return to your family or homeland, must have been a crushing blow. The very concept of hope was twisted into another form of torment. You can almost feel the slow erosion of spirit, the dawning realization that the only true escape was death. Historians still debate the precise economic rationale behind doublage. While it was ostensibly for colonization and development, many scholars argue that the policy was ultimately self-defeating. The libérés were not productive citizens, they were a drain on resources and a source of social instability. The high mortality rates meant a constant need for new prisoners, making the colonization aspect largely a failure. The question remains, was this policy a genuine, if flawed, attempt at settlement, or a convenient way to simply sweep the undesirables permanently out of sight and out of mind, regardless of the human cost? You also see the broader societal impact of doublage on French Guiana itself. The influx of tens of thousands of hardened criminals and desperate libérés created a volatile social environment. The local Creole population often viewed the convicts with fear and suspicion. The colony struggled with a persistent reputation for violence and lawlessness, hindering its economic development and leading to its continued isolation from the rest of the world. Some libérés, against all odds, did manage to establish some semblance of a life. A few found niches in small trades. Some married local women, though opportunities for this were extremely limited, and a tiny minority even prospered. But these were rare exceptions. For most, the life after conviction was a continued descent into poverty, ill health, and loneliness. Far from the familiar shores of France, the policy of doublage highlights a fundamental philosophical question about justice and punishment. When does a sentence become a lifelong condemnation? And is such a sentence ever truly just? For the thousands who faced doublage, their initial crime, however minor, effectively became a life sentence of exile and slow attrition, far harsher than any official declaration. The French penal colony was not just a place for temporary punishment, it was a system designed to permanently erase individuals from French society, ensuring they would never return home. This continued suffering, even after the sentence was served, adds another layer to the terrible life of a prisoner in this forgotten corner of the world. You have followed the terrifying journey of a prisoner to Devil's Island, witnessed the brutal daily life, the ravages of disease, the crushing isolation, and the agonizing despair of doublage. Now you turn to the eventual, and thankfully inevitable, abolition of this notorious penal colony. The story of its closure is a testament to persistent humanitarian efforts, shifting political tides, and the slow, grinding force of international condemnation. The first seeds of abolition were sown decades before the final closure. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, voices of dissent and criticism grew louder in France. Journalists, humanitarians, and former inmates who managed to escape or return began to publish harrowing accounts of the conditions, exposing the myth of the humane penal colony. You imagine the shock and outrage among the French public as the true horrors of Devil's Island gradually came to light, chipping away at the government's carefully constructed narrative. A commonly known historical fact is that the Alfred Dreyfus affair, which saw the wrongfully accused officer imprisoned on Devil's Island, played a significant role in tarnishing the penal colony's reputation. Although Dreyfus's imprisonment was an anomaly compared to the typical convict, his case brought immense international scrutiny to the French justice system and, by extension, to the brutal conditions of its overseas prisons. The scandal put Devil's Island on the world map, not as a symbol of French justice, but as a monument to injustice and cruelty. The international community also began to exert pressure. Human rights organizations, though nascent by modern standards, highlighted the abysmal mortality rates and the inhumane treatment of prisoners. Foreign governments and newspapers reported on the scandalous conditions, painting France in a negative light. This external pressure, combined with growing internal dissent, made the continued operation of the penal colony increasingly untenable from a moral and political standpoint. One particularly significant, yet less commonly discussed detail in the push for abolition was the role of doctors and medical reports. Early in the colony's history, official medical reports often downplayed the severity of disease and mortality. However, as the 20th century progressed, more honest and detailed medical assessments began to filter back to France, unequivocally demonstrating the devastating impact of tropical diseases, malnutrition, and unsanitary conditions on the prisoners. These scientific facts, stark and undeniable, made it increasingly difficult for the government to maintain the facade of a rehabilitative institution, providing hard evidence against the official narrative. You imagine these doctors, perhaps initially hesitant, eventually risking their careers to expose the truth through their grim statistics. The changing political landscape in France also played a crucial role. By the 1930s, the French Third Republic was more susceptible to public opinion and humanitarian concerns. The rise of new political ideologies, which placed a greater emphasis on social welfare and human rights, made the anachronistic brutality of Devil's Island increasingly out of step with modern values. The economic justification for the colony also waned. The forced labor was ultimately inefficient and costly. Given the high mortality rates and the constant need for new transports of prisoners, the final blow came with the outbreak of World War II. The logistical challenges of transporting prisoners across a war-torn Atlantic became insurmountable. With France occupied by Nazi Germany and the Vichy government in power, the remote penal colony became even more isolated and difficult to manage. This practical impossibility, combined with the decades of mounting criticism, provided the final impetus for its closure. You feel a wave of profound relief as you learn that in 1938, the French government officially abolished the penal colony in French Guiana. However, the process of actual closure was gradual. Prisoners were not immediately released. Instead, transports back to France began, and remaining inmates were transferred to other facilities. The last official convicts were repatriated in 1953. It took many more years for the physical remnants of the prison system to truly fade. And even today, ruins of the camp stand as grim reminders. The legacy of Devil's Island is complex and enduring. It serves as a stark historical marker of extreme state power and human cruelty. It's a reminder of what can happen when a society decides to simply discard its unwanted elements, when punishment overshadows rehabilitation, and when human rights are systematically ignored. The dark stain of this place on French history is undeniable. The academic debate continues about the ultimate number of lives lost due to the penal colony. While exact figures are impossible to ascertain, estimates range from tens of thousands to as many as $70,000 to 80,000 deaths over its century of operation, primarily from disease, malnutrition, and the harsh conditions. This staggering mortality rate underscores the colony's true nature as a place of slow death. Today, the islands and parts of the mainland camps are open to visitors, serving as a grim but vital historical site. You imagine walking through the crumbling cell blocks, feeling the oppressive heat, and listening to the silence that now hangs over a place once filled with suffering. It's a powerful, sobering experience, ensuring that the terrible life of a prisoner in Devil's Island and the lessons learned from it are never truly forgotten. The physical remnants serve as a perpetual warning against repeating the mistakes of the past, urging us towards a more humane and just future. You now stand at the threshold of understanding, having traversed the harrowing landscape of Devil's Island, from the initial journey to its eventual, albeit slow, demise. As the echoes of that terrible place begin to fade, you are left with the profound task of reflecting on the larger themes that illuminates human rights, justice, and the enduring lessons that resonate far beyond the shores of French Guiana. The most undeniable lesson from Devil's Island is the absolute necessity of human rights. You've witnessed a system that systematically stripped individuals of their dignity, their freedom, their health, and ultimately, their lives. Every aspect of the penal colony, from the forced labor and starvation to the arbitrary brutality of the guards and the soul-crushing isolation, was a direct violation of fundamental human dignity. This historical account serves as a stark, timeless warning about the consequences when a state prioritizes punishment and control over the inherent value of human life. It underscores the vital importance of universal declarations and protections for every individual, regardless of their past. Consider the concept of justice. What kind of justice was served on Devil's Island? Was it truly rehabilitation or merely retribution on a catastrophic scale? You've seen how minor offenses could lead to a life sentence of slow death, how the system disproportionately affected the vulnerable, and how due process was often a mere formality. This compels you to reflect on modern justice systems. Are they truly rehabilitative? Do they offer fair trials and humane conditions? The history of Devil's Island provides a chilling benchmark against which any justice system should be measured, urging a constant reevaluation of its principles and practices. A commonly known historical fact that underpins these lessons is the high mortality rate of the penal colony, which was not an accidental byproduct, but an intrinsic outcome of its design and neglect. The sheer number of deaths, predominantly from disease and malnutrition, reveals that for many, Devil's Island was, in effect, a death sentence by attrition. This grim statistic fundamentally challenges any claim of rehabilitation or humane treatment, forcing us to confront the reality of a state-sanctioned extermination by neglect. The theme of isolation extends beyond the physical confines of the cells. You saw how geographic isolation allowed the horrors of the colony to remain largely hidden from the French public for decades. This highlights the importance of transparency and accountability in state institutions, especially those that deal with vulnerable populations. When systems are allowed to operate without external scrutiny, far from public view, abuses are almost inevitable. It's a powerful argument for open reporting, independent oversight, and the unwavering commitment of journalists and humanitarians to shine a light into the darkest corners. One particularly poignant, yet less commonly discussed detail is the enduring stigma associated with having been a bagnard. Even for the few who survived and eventually returned to France, often through illegal means after doublage was officially abolished. The label of former convict of Devil's Island clung to them like a shroud. They faced discrimination, difficulty finding work, and social ostracization. This demonstrates how punitive systems can cast a long, dehumanizing shadow even after release, preventing true reintegration and highlighting the need for comprehensive post-incarceration support and societal acceptance. You sense the heavy weight of that invisible scarlet letter, following a person long after their chains were gone. The academic debate often centers on the banality of evil as applied to the functionaries of the colony. Were the guards and administrators inherently evil? Or did the system itself, with its remote location and lack of oversight, normalize and even demand cruel behavior? Historians grapple with how ordinary individuals can participate in or allow such widespread suffering. This encourages us to look not just at individual perpetrators, but at the systemic conditions that enable and perpetuate injustice, reminding us that evil can often manifest not as grand malevolence, but as indifference, neglect, and bureaucratic cruelty. The story of Devil's Island serves as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of absolute despair. Despite the overwhelming odds, stories of courage, small acts of defiance, and the desperate yearning for freedom persisted. From the meticulously kept diaries to the audacious, often suicidal escape attempts. These narratives remind us of humanity's stubborn refusal to be completely broken, even when stripped of everything. Finally, you reflect on the role of memory in history. The ruins of the penal colony, now silent and decaying, stand as a physical reminder of a terrible past. By studying and remembering these events, we are not simply dwelling on suffering, we are actively engaging in an act of prevention. We learn to recognize the early warning signs of dehumanization, to challenge systems that erode human rights, and to advocate for justice and compassion in all aspects of society. The terrible life of a prisoner in Devil's Island is a forgotten horror no more. It is a lesson, etched in the collective consciousness, guiding us towards a more humane and just future.